Now the White House put out a new report showing that tariffs are not causing inflation. The chair of the White House Economic Advisors Council, the group behind that report, Steve Miran, joins me now. Steve, great to see you. Thank you for being here. You say the odds of inflation caused by tariffs are extremely low. You actually compared it to the chances of a pandemic or meteors. Explain, though, to folks why rising tariffs don't end up being passed on to consumers.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. Look, there's no evidence at all of inflation being passed on to consumers. What we did was we looked through the details of the inflation index to look at everything at the component part level and set everything aside into parts that are imported versus parts that are domestically produced. And the stuff that is domestically produced has been suffering higher rates of inflation than the stuff that's been imported. In fact, since December, before the tariff started being implemented, the price of domestically produced goods, the price of overall goods has gone up by about 0.4%, while the price of imported goods has actually gone down by 0.1%, right? And that's exactly the opposite of what you would expect if you thought tariffs were going to lead to meaningful inflation. So there's just no evidence of it.
No, and actually we saw the same thing occur in the first Trump administration, but people, including folks at the Fed, continue to complain that the tariffs are going to eventually show up as inflation, to which you say, what, specifically to the Fed?
Well, I mean, I think exactly what you just said. We ran this experiment already. We know what happens. We lived through it in 2018, 2019. There was no shortage of Cassandras saying the world was going to end, growth was going to get a terrible hit, inflation was going to skyrocket. And you know what? None of those things happened. There was zero economic evidence of meaningful inflation in the first term from the China tariffs. And again, to date, there's no evidence of it. So, I think that people keep saying, various folks are, critics of the administration and other folks around Washington and elsewhere keep saying, oh, the inflation is going to show up, but it hasn't thus far. There's no evidence of it.
By the way, Art Laffer's been saying that for years. And in fact, there are economic theories that go back to the 1930s that suggested tariffs can cause problems, but not inflation. Well, now, one problem, though, that I can think of, the president today is suggesting that we may have 200% tariffs on pharmaceuticals. And it's going to take a long time for the domestic production of pharmaceuticals to replace those that are now produced abroad. What do you do in the interim? I mean, how will that 200% tariff interfere with our ability to get pharmaceuticals that cannot be made sufficiently in sufficient numbers now domestically?
Well, it'll create the incentives for industry to accelerate the timeline and to move things forward.
What about
and I think
now? That's the problem,
coupled.
because if we have 200% tariffs on pharmaceuticals right now that take years to develop the domestic capacity to grow, what do we do in the meantime?
Well, what you do in the meantime is you make it easy for industry to invest and to build the facilities they need to do the domestic manufacturing. The president knows that this is a significant health security risk, a significant national security risk, and therefore we need to address it in some way or another. And you see those incentives being built through the One Big Beautiful Bill, the full expensing on investments that are there on new factories and equipment. You see that happening through the deregulation agenda of the Trump administration. The president knows that you got to cut red tape if you want businesses to invest. And so we're going to make it as easy as possible and as profitable as possible for companies to build stuff here, including pharmaceuticals and other industries.
But again, you can't just snap your fingers and say, OK, we have a pharmaceutical company here. It takes a long time to set one up.
No, absolutely. That's true. But nevertheless, the president knows that as the largest consumer in the world, as the largest consumer market in the world, the United States has all the leverage here. Other countries have no alternative options to selling into the United States. And that's part of why we don't have any inflation from the tariffs thus far, because we have the leverage, we have the bargaining power. That means that other countries have to accept those lower prices when they sell things to us. And they end up eating the cost of the tariffs. It's happened in the data thus far, and it's going to continue to happen.
Well, you've been right so far, 100% right. The Fed has been 100% wrong on this issue so far. We'll see how things go coming up. Steve Miran, great to see you. Thank you for discussing this with us. Appreciate it.